Finally, I've got my garage back. The old bravado from the Quantum Mekanix channel is gone. Finally out of here after all that work. I get the garage to myself, but not for long. And that is because my neighbor down the street has noticed my empty garage, and he texted me this morning saying that he took it upon himself to drop off a 2005 Toyota Camry that he thinks is going to be a good one for me. He likes to try to stump me. Interesting because he doesn't own a 2005 Toyota Camry, so this must be somebody else's car. But he says that no check engine light surges when you accelerate. And two mechanics looked at it, couldn't figure it out. This is all I know. It is in my driveway with the key under the mat. So I guess we'll go ahead and get this car and take a look. Sounds like a good one. But also, considering the no check engine light and kind of that obscure description, we're going to talk about a little corollary theme in this video, and that is how to get direction on a diagnosis when you have something like this where there's very little to go on. We're not going to have a check engine light code to point us in a way, something like that, some kind of noise, rattle, and easy mechanical diagnosis. Something like this is going to take a little brain work. It is important from a scientific perspective that we get direction on the diagnosis, not only so that we don't just go looking around like a bunch of hacks for something we don't know exists even, but also it will be very apparent that it's important to do that to get a baseline so that we know we fixed the repair. So we'll go ahead and talk about that while we fix this car. Let me go ahead and bring it in. All right, well, there most definitely is a Toyota Camry in my driveway, so let's go ahead and bring it in and see what we got. All right, here she is. So I actually drove it around for a little bit. The car was cold when I got it, and I can tell you right away when you drive it, yeah, it has definitely a noticeable type of surging problem. There is no check engine light on it. And the best way I can describe it is when you're accelerating, it feels like you're speeding up and letting off and speeding up and letting off and speeding up and letting off. It does this at a rate of maybe twice a second or so, so it's fairly rapid. Also, you'll get to listen to it. The idle is loping. It's hunting a little bit, it seems. Kind of reminds me of that Volvo from a while back. And those are the symptoms that we've got on it. So what we're going to do now is go ahead, let's get some data, see if we can get some kind of direction here. All right, we'll let you get a listen to this loping idle. And this thing's drive-by-wire. So let me go in there and rev it up just a little bit. And actually, you know what? It is doing it now. Let me go ahead and put the microphone here, let you take a listen. And I can tell you that when you drive, it does that too, only at a much, much faster rate. So the question is, where are we going to get started here? Granted, this sounds a lot like that Volvo, and it is a drive-by-wire system. Does this thing have a bad throttle body? Vacuum leak could do this. All kinds of things could do this. Low fuel pressure could do this. So where do we start? So my first advice is, of course, to go ahead and look for codes. You may find some pending codes. It's one of your best way to get directions. After that, what I do, I like to go for fuel trim next. Fuel trim is a great way to get a direction because you eliminate half of your variables just there. A problem is either going to be the response to or cause of a rich condition or lean condition. By doing the fuel trim analysis and seeing what condition you're dealing with, you can eliminate half the variables right there. If we find that this car has a rich condition that it's trying to compensate for, then we don't have to worry about looking for things like vacuum leaks, low fuel pressure, things like that. So it eliminates a lot of variables right off the bat. Now, that said, one of the things that I do want to address is this mentality. And that is the people that are going to be like, oh, see, there you go again, right to the scan tool. You don't do a visual inspection. You should start with a visual inspection. Well, first of all, I always do a visual inspection. Every diagnostic video I probably have ever done has had a visual inspection done. You almost can't not do it. The difference is I do a visual inspection when I have some idea what the hell I am looking for. Let's take a look in this thing. All right, here's the engine. I have absolutely no idea what I'm looking for. I've never even seen one of these engines before. I noticed that there's obviously supposed to be some kind of cover over the exhaust manifold. This at least tells me that some hack was in here before. Oxygen sensor, actually it's a Toyota, so it's probably an air fuel sensor. It's connected. Well, here's a loose evap component, but everything's connected on it. It's all plugged in, all the vacuum hoses are there and everything. So I don't think that's it. There's a mass airflow sensor. Maybe that's the problem. Should I take the air box off and inspect the mass airflow sensor? I don't know. I have no idea what I'm looking for. Am I looking for an electrical problem? Am I looking for a vacuum leak? If your 6-year-old ran up to you and was yelling, "Daddy, I lost it, I lost it, I lost it," would you just go around and start looking? Or would you maybe ask, what is it that we're looking for? And is it in the house or is it outside? Wouldn't you get some kind of direction to narrow it down? I have absolutely no direction here on what to go on. The other thing is that there's probably a million things that I could find on a visual inspection with this engine. We saw how many of the harnesses were loose. We've got some missing parts, things like that. But are those what's causing the problem? If I do not draw baselines to go from, then if I do a visual inspection, and let's say I find a vacuum hose that's off, does connecting that fix it? Or does connecting it still have a fuel trim of 25 and the check engine light's going to come on after 2 more drive cycles? We have no idea because we have no baseline. Obviously, a way to do that would be to go ahead and check your scan tool after you do the visual. But what were the changes made from the things you did that may not have solved the problem? You don't know. So it is unscientific to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get some data. If my fuel trims are inversely proportional to engine load, then yes, I am going to go ahead and do a vacuum leak. A lot of people in other videos will be like, why didn't you go ahead and smoke test it? Because I didn't think there was a vacuum leak. Why would I possibly smoke test an engine unless I know there's a vacuum leak? My favorite one, though, is the guy that says he would have found the vacuum leak in a previous video in only 2 minutes because he sprays down the car with brake cleaner. Well, that's great if you already know it has a vacuum leak, because there is no way that I'm going to be spraying down a car with a can of flammable fluid without first verifying that I'm not chasing an electrical problem with the secondary, that there may be some open in the secondary, that when I do my visual, I cause that to short out to the frame, and then I diagnosed an electrical problem with the car because it caught on fire. So you got to think rationally about what you're doing. So the way to do this intelligently is going to be to get some data that will give us enough direction that at least I know what system on the vehicle I am going to do a visual on, and whether I'm going to be looking for something mechanical or electrical at that. That is the way to do it. So let's go ahead and get some codes. Maybe we've got a pending code that'll point us in a direction. We do not know diagnostic codes. Interesting, no diagnostic codes with a condition like this. Inclined to think that throttle body is the problem, but why do I want to take everything apart when there's no more reason to think the throttle body is responsible for this than a bad fuel pump or something like that? There's absolutely nothing to go on at this point. Everything's just guessing, and it's a waste of time. In just a minute here, I'm going to determine the direction. All right, so we've got a 3.9 long-term fuel trim. Now, obviously, I definitely learned my lesson from that one previous video that we are definitely going to look at total fuel trim and bring the short-term fuel trim up. And, wow. Okay, well, this is interesting because we are dealing with neither a lean condition nor a rich condition. We are dealing with both, so that is unexpected. But another example, like in that previous video, to always bring up that short-term fuel trim. Had we not done that, we would have looked at this and think that we don't have a fuel trim video, at least at idle, but then of course we'd need to check it under load. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, very interesting. Very little change with the long-term under load. So I don't know if the codes have been cleared recently and the fuel cells are not memorized yet or established. But whatever the case is, in the previous video with the vacuum leak, a lot of people thought that the lesson in that video was, see, you get a vacuum leak, do a visual. That is not the lesson in that previous video. The lesson in the previous video was that you can have conditions where you'll have a normal long-term fuel trim, but it does not adapt to zero a short-term fuel trim because the short-term fuel trim is maxed out and cannot bring the vehicle to stoichiometry. It was actually a brilliant lesson that a lot of people were not familiar with. Had I done total fuel trim on that previous video, I would have diagnosed a vacuum leak in 2 minutes. I made the mistake of making an assumption. I am not going to do that in this video. We have one of two things. We either have a condition that is causing the oxygen sensor, or actually more likely an air fuel sensor, to respond all over the place, or we have an air fuel sensor problem that is causing the fuel system to go nuts trying to bring it to stoich. So our next step, now that we have a direction here, is we need to look at that. So I think the best way to do this is let's look at the graph. We can go to O2 sensors. We can, okay, there's sensor 2 voltage. That actually might be interesting to look at later. But to be honest with you, I may have to refresh my memory on wideband sensors here. This is a Toyota, so we know that we should expect 2.2, or was it 3.3 volts? I think 3.3 volts is stoich. And either way, it doesn't matter because we can bring up the equivalence ratio. I just saw that here. So let's bring that up. Oh, no way. I just saw 5 volts. Impossible. Impossible. Okay, we have a direction. We have a 100% confirmed direction in a few minutes. We don't have any codes, though. How is that possible? But at 5 volts, and I do remember a Toyota, because that was the document that I used in that previous video, which I strongly suggest you look at if you're not familiar with wideband sensors. 3.3 would be stoich, and 5 and 0 is all we have. I didn't think you could go up to 5. There's an electrical problem here, either with the sensor itself or with the PCM or the wiring. But this is our direction. This is it. So now we know where to do a visual. I think what I'm going to do is let's just. The problem is with it changing. I know it's plugged in. Let's look and see if there's something grounding out on that thing. But this, look at that equivalence ratio. This is insane. Yeah, let's start with that, and then we're going to go ahead and induce some variables here. But now we know what to look for. All right, so luckily the air fuel sensor is just right here, and this is only a 4-cylinder. And it does not look like it's going to be grounding on anything. Now the rest of this wiring harness here, you know, you follow it up and it just goes into a much larger wiring harness and off to the PCM. But it does appear that there is a connection ultimately to the PCM, or at least that the PCM is working because it is responding. And one of the things is, for those of you guys not familiar with this, you're thinking, well, couldn't this still be a vacuum leak or something? No, this is definitely not a vacuum leak. The reason is because if this was a vacuum leak, we would have seen a consistent higher adjustment in the fuel trim. We do not see it. It's very clear that this is not a condition with the car, a mechanical condition causing that response on an O2 sensor, or air fuel sensor, sorry, especially with a 5 volt and a 0.8 to 1.25 equivalence ratio. This is an O2 sensor signal circuit problem that is causing the engine to act like that. This is not going to be fuel pressure related. Again, we would see that with a consistent fuel trim adjustment. We are seeing fuel trim adjustment to a faulty air fuel sensor circuit. That is what we are seeing here. Okay, so now we also, by the way, have a baseline, so we know what this car is going to look like when we fix it, and it won't look like that. What's amazing, though, is if you know about these things from watching that previous video, how do you not get a check engine light here? That absolutely makes no sense. How is that possible to go to 0 to 5, which you can't even do, and not get a check engine light? So, you know, what I may be inclined to do, because this has to set a check engine light, and I believe maybe we either don't have enough drive cycles or something, we are going to get a check engine light on that if we drive this car enough. So I think I may go ahead and do that. Yeah, let me go ahead and drive this car first and get this check engine light to set. Okay, I did actually go ahead and drive the car around a little bit, got the check engine light to set. So, but what's interesting, we've got 2 codes. We've got a 2196. You can see we've got a freeze frame for it. Notice fuel trim is insignificant in that freeze frame. And also we've got a 2238. So we know that the 2238 is a circuit code. That I certainly believe. The O2 sensor rich, first of all, it's interesting that it doesn't say that it's an air fuel sensor, but it definitely is. Maybe that's the downstream sensor. No, that's bank 1 sensor 1. So how would it be stuck rich? Actually, you know what? I do have an explanation for this. I know I know what's going on here and why we didn't get the check engine light. I remember in the video where I went over how to do air fuel sensor diagnosis and understanding, I did use some documentation from the Toyota engineers, and I don't think I mentioned it in that video, but the conditions for setting the DTC on the air fuel sensor with those codes. What it is you need to have a sustained out of range for 5 seconds. And if you do not have that sustained range for 5 seconds, then you won't get the code thrown. Well, we just saw on the computer that we're waving in and out almost every second. So we're never meeting the criteria for throwing the code. That's why the check engine light isn't thrown. But it definitely does confirm we absolutely do have some type of circuit problem here. But we're going to go ahead and narrow down whether the sensor itself is the problem now by inducing some variables. Okay, let's, oh no, oh no, that's a bad one. Okay, that is not cool. I have some type of hard disk problem. Wow, that is all that I need here. Golly, what the hell, where did that come from? That is actually a real problem. You know what, I need to pause here and I need to back up my important data because I've got a lot of stuff on this computer with warranties and things that I've promised for people that I've done stuff for. So I'm going to pause here, we're going to come back. All right, I don't know about you, but I'm just going to start off with a visual. Ha, just kidding. Actually, it would be reasonable to do in this case because we actually have a direction. But what I did, I actually did do some diagnostics. There's no question about it. My hard drive on my laptop is absolutely failing, and thank God for Ubuntu. I was able to back up my data. It's been at least 2 months since I backed up. Shame on me. But I am going to have to buy another hard drive for this computer. I am actually going to have to go and take care of this first. To be honest with you, I really need this thing to work. And actually, it might be a good idea for me to update my hard drive anyway. So unfortunately, we also cannot use my DVOM because if you remember, air fuel sensor signal voltage is artificial. It is imaginary. There is not actually voltage with it that can be measured with a DVOM. So right now, I'm kind of stuck. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to go ahead and end this video here until further notice. We definitely will continue it once I get my computer up and running again. All right, I totally didn't expect that, but I also have some more unexpected news. While I was messing around fixing my computer, my neighbor actually did call me to ask how things were going with the car, and I actually got a very, very interesting update from him. That is, as I expected, not the original engine from that car. So basically the story is this is his mom's car, and his mom is rather elderly and kind of has a lot of problems. She actually blew the engine in the car, had a replacement engine, and then the replacement engine, she ran over something in the road, ripped the oil pan or something, and destroyed that engine. This is the third engine on this car in how many miles? That car only has 58,000 miles on it. So here's the story. The last guy that redid the engine could not get the wiring harness to fit with the engine. So obviously he got an engine from a different model year, and the wiring harness was not compatible. As a matter of fact, if we look back here by the throttle body behind this, and incidentally, that is not a vacuum port if you were wondering, and you should know that it's not by looking at this. It obviously is just the peg that fits right into here, but it's ripped. But I do need it in there so we can look back here. There is a open connector under the throttle body here that actually doesn't go to anything. And actually, if you look at that, that clearly to me looks like an IAC control. And of course, like I said, this is drive-by-wire. So why would you have an IAC control on a drive-by-wire? So what it is that this wiring harness is obviously not the match for this engine. So what that guy did when he discovered this problem is he towed the car to an electrical shop where they apparently fitted the harness or adapted it somehow to be able to work with this engine. After they did that, the engine did run, but it developed this problem. The electrical shop is saying that this problem, which they couldn't figure out, is the result of a mechanical problem with the engine installation. So they're blaming the first guy. The first guy is saying that he knows the engine is good, and it's the electrical guys that did something wrong. So obviously, whatever, but that is interesting because that makes a whole new set of variables, and also, of course, validation. We've got an electrical problem here. So yeah, we're going to have to go ahead and pull some wiring diagrams here. And yeah, this is unfortunately for the people that like wrench spinning videos. Yeah, you're going to have to get back to Eric the Car Guy. That's not going to be the kind of video this is going to turn out to be. But you know what? My wiring diagram stuff is on that computer. So I'm going to have to look on the internet and see what I can find. And even then, it's not going to be useful without my scan tool. So we are stuck like Chuck here. So I will continue this video as soon as I can. The owner told me that I'm welcome to keep this car as long as I need, so it may be next weekend before we can continue this. But hang in there. I think we've got a good one here.